Hot winds swept across the barren plains like a whisper of death. Clara Burn woke in cracked, dusty earth, her body torn by pain and blood loss. The wagon train was gone. No creaking wooden wheels on sand, no hoofprints, no farewell. They had chosen to leave her silently. The night before, her husband, Nathaniel, had fallen to a traitor's bullet. Clara swallowed her grief and forced herself forward, as if her heart were not already shattered. But the others saw the truth in her eyes. A widow, a burden, someone no longer useful for the brutal journey ahead. And when dawn came, they chose to move on. No water, no horse. Only an empty canteen left behind, like a final, hollow gesture of pity. The sun scorched her pale skin raw. Every step dragged both agony and betrayal behind it. Clara could have lain down and let the sand claim her, but she didn't. If she was going to die, she would die standing. She tightened her grip on the empty canteen and walked on no idea where she was headed, only knowing she could not stop. And in that moment, when everything seemed finished, her fate began to change. As Clara nearly collapsed in the blazing sea of sand, a shadow appeared at the edge of her vision. At first, she thought it was just a mirage born of heat and exhaustion. But the figure didn't fade. It stood still, silent, watching. A man, tall, solidly built, a rifle slung across his back. No horse, no hurry, just standing there, as if he were part of this unforgiving land itself. Fear rose in Clara's chest. The settlers' stories about savages rushed through her mind. But then she remembered it was the so-called civilized people who had left her to die, and the man before her had not turned away. "Please, water," she whispered, her voice as dry as sand. He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the empty canteen beside her. No pity, no mockery, just assessment. Then he stepped forward. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't threaten her. His hand gently closed around her wrist, checking her pulse like a quiet physician. Before she could react, he lifted her up as if she weighed no more than the wind. The world spun. The warmth of his body clashed with the desert's burning heat. Clara wanted to resist, but she had no strength left. Darkness closed in. The last thought she had before slipping into unconsciousness was this. This man did not leave her behind. Clara woke not beneath the scorching sun, but in the gentle warmth of a fire. The smells of smoke, earth, and animal hide surrounded her. The curved ceiling of a tent arched above, light slipping in through a narrow opening. This was not a settler's cabin. This place was older, quieter, and it did not belong to her. Across the fire, the man who had saved her sat silently, stitching leather. He didn't look at her, but Clara knew he noticed every small movement she made. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice still weak. "Alive," he answered shortly. It wasn't what she wanted to know, but it was enough to make her fall silent. When she stepped outside the tent, she felt eyes turn toward her at once. Children stopped playing. Women paused their weaving. Men spoke to one another in a language she didn't understand. She stood among them like a strange cut in an otherwise complete picture. An older woman approached, her sharp gaze inspecting Clara closely. She touched Clara's arm and spoke a few words in the native tongue. The man translated simply, "She says you're too thin. You need to eat more." Not hostility, but not a welcome either. "Why did you save me?" Clara asked. "You were dying. You should have let me die." "I don't do that." She looked around the village, at the people here closed off, resilient, self-sufficient. Then he said something that made her heart hitch. "You stay. Any no tells." After being abandoned, Clara didn't know what to do with a chance that was freely given. Morning in the village began with golden sunlight spilling across the hillside. Clara stood with a bow in her hands, the weight of it both unfamiliar and heavy. The bowstring bit into her skin, making her already bleeding fingers tremble. Tano stood a few steps away, arms crossed, silently watching. "You could help me," Clara snapped. "I am helping," he replied calmly. There were no long instructions, no reassurance, just a steady, waiting gaze. She drew the bow. The arrow flew and struck the ground a few paces short of the target. Again and again. Her arms burned, her shoulder throbbed, and her pride was worn down with every failure. But Tano didn't mock her. He didn't praise her either. He only said briefly, "Again." Day after day, Clara learned how to stand firm, how to steady her breath, how not to flinch when the bowstring snapped back against her skin. Each evening, Tano cleaned the thin cuts on her hands and wrapped them in animal hide. No words of encouragement, only quiet patience. She wanted to hate that coldness, but she understood now. This wasn't cruelty. This was how they forged warriors through discipline and trial by fire. By the 5th day, her arrows flew straighter. Still not perfect, but no longer weak. Clara began to realize something. She wasn't just learning how to shoot a bow. She was learning how not to fall. When Tano placed the skinning knife in Clara's hand, she knew today's lesson would be different. No wooden targets, no arrows buried in dirt. Tomorrow, they would hunt. They left the village before dawn. The air was cold and still. Clara followed behind, carefully placing her feet where Tano had stepped, learning how to move without making the dry grass whisper. Her heart pounded when he raised his hand for her to stop. Rabbit tracks marked the soft ground. She lifted her bow. The first arrow missed. The rabbit bolted like lightning. Clara swallowed her frustration. No rebuke followed because Tano said nothing, just a single nod. Try again. The second arrow flew true. The rabbit fell, small and silent. Clara knelt beside it, feeling the warmth fade from its fragile body. Her throat tightened. Tano held out the knife. This was the real test. Her hand trembled as she made the first cut, not from disgust, but from full awareness of what she was doing. Survival was not beautiful, not gentle. It demanded choice and responsibility. When the work was done, Tano nodded once. No praise, but clear acknowledgement. Clara looked at her blood-stained hands and understood that what had changed was not the world but herself. She no longer turned away from what had to be done to live. The storm struck without warning, heavy and biting cold. Tano led Clara through slick rock crevices until they stood before a river raging in full force. The water was dark and churning, crashing against stone as if ready to swallow anything that dared step in. Clara froze. Tano went first, placing his feet on each rock as if he'd been born in the current. He looked back at her, his gaze neither forcing her forward nor allowing retreat. "Go," he said. Clara drew a deep breath and followed. The first rock was slick. She clenched her jaw to keep her balance. Water splashed over her ankles, numbing cold. Midstream, a stone shifted beneath her foot. The world flipped. She plunged into the water, the current dragging her like a dead branch. The cold ripped the air from her lungs. Panic crushed her chest. Then a strong hand clamped around her wrist. Tano hauled her onto the bank. Clara coughed violently, shaking, mud caked to her skin. She hated the weakness, hated that she had been afraid. "You're afraid of the river," Tano said evenly. "I'm trying," she whispered. "Fear isn't the enemy," he replied. "Running from it is." The next day, he took her back to the river, and the day after that, again and again. At first, she trembled. Then her steps grew steadier. Then she crossed the rocks as if she belonged there. Clara didn't learn how to stop being afraid. She learned how to step through it. Clara's transformation didn't come in a single, explosive moment, but through quiet days strung together. Her skin darkened under the sun. Her hands hardened, her footing steady on slopes that once left her breathless. The bow was no longer foreign. The knife no longer shook in her grip. She could cross the river without hesitation, track animals even when the wind shifted, stand on a ridge, and listen to the land the way Tano once had. The village changed in its own way, too. Children no longer hid behind their mothers when she passed. They watched her with curiosity instead of fear. One woman left a few extra berries in Clara's bowl each evening, no words, just a small but unmistakable gesture. The men no longer looked at her as an outsider, but nodded as she went by. There was no grand ceremony, no spoken declaration, but Clara felt its acceptance taking root like a seed beneath the soil. She was no longer the one who was saved, free. She was someone who could stand on her own. One evening, as the sun sank behind the red cliffs, Clara realized she no longer counted the days since she'd been abandoned. She was no longer surviving 1 hour at a time. She was becoming part of this place and of herself. The peace shattered with a plume of black smoke on the horizon. Clara felt something was wrong before she even saw it, the bird's sudden silence, the tension tightening the air. Tano stood on the ridge, eyes fixed on the distance. By dusk, they arrived. 5 riders came in at a gallop, dust rolling beneath their horses' hooves. At their head was Matthew Gage, the man who had once sat by the campfire with her and her husband, who had called Nathaniel a friend, and who had left Clara to die in the desert. His gaze settled on her, flickering with surprise before turning cold. "I thought you were dead," he sneered. Clara didn't lower her eyes. "I was," she said. "The woman you knew died out there." Tano stepped up beside her, solid as stone. "She doesn't belong to you," Gage scoffed. "And she doesn't belong to you either." Clara felt the old pain surge, the burning sun, the choking dust, the empty canteen. But instead of trembling, she straightened her back. "I belong to myself," she said. The air thickened, heavy as the moment before a storm. Gage's hand drifted toward his gun. He still thought she was the weak woman she had been. He was wrong. The moment Gage's hand touched his gun, everything exploded. Gunfire tore through the air, horses screamed, dust billowed into a choking cloud. But Clara was no longer the woman frozen in the middle of chaos. She dropped low just as Tano had taught her, and slid aside as a bullet tore past. The blade in her hand flashed. One rider lost his balance as she cut into his leg. He crashed from the saddle with a scream. Tano moved like a storm, precise, relentless. The intruders realized too late that they weren't facing prey. They were facing people who knew how to defend their land. Gage was thrown to the ground, clutching a wound at his side. He stared up at Clara in disbelief. "You'll never be one of them," he snarled, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. Clara stood over him, breathing hard but steady-eyed. No trembling, no hesitation. "I don't need to be," she said. "I'm something new." And the president's son. In Gage's eyes, she saw the truth for the first time, not contempt, but fear. Not of death, but of what she had become. Tano stood beside her, blade firm in his hand. Behind them, the village was ready. At last, Gage mounted his horse and retreated. Clara didn't watch him go. She turned back toward the fire, toward the people who had taught her how to live. This time, she wasn't left behind. She had chosen to stay and to fight. Autumn swept through the canyon with cold winds and gentler sunlight. Clara sat by the council fire, no longer a lost guest, but part of the circle itself. She shared what she knew about trade routes, settler weapons, the ways they moved, and the lies they told. Not for revenge, but for protection. When the elder woman asked, "Why did you stay?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Because when they left me to die, this place taught me how to live." Acceptance came not with cheers, but with a single nod. And that was enough. When winter arrived, Clara rode beside Tano, a bough on her back, a blade at her side. Children called her name. Women smiled. Warriors nodded in respect. Then one morning, the first snow fell. Clara stepped outside and let the flakes touch her skin. The cold bit deep, but she didn't pull away. "You're no longer the woman they found in the desert," Tano said. Clara smiled. "No," she replied. "I'm the woman who walked out of it. Wear the tender." From abandonment to choice, from victim to warrior, Clara's journey is a reminder that we are not defined by where we fall, but by how we rise. If this story resonated with you, keep following to discover more powerful journeys of transformation.